So with that, I'd like to start just with quick introductions. So next to me here we have Susan. Susan is, forgive me, Susan is a community activist in New Haven. She leads the work against Islamophobia for local chapters of the Jewish Voices for Peace. Susan joined her husband Shelly on the January journey to Jordan and Palestine. And then we have Bishop John Selders. Bishop John Selders recently got a hire, right, as Assistant Dean of Students in Trinity College, so we're all excited and congratulate him for that. Reverend John Selders is an ordained minister serving in the United Church of Christ, the organizing pastor of the Amistad United Church of Christ in Hartford, Connecticut, and now the assistant dean in Trinity College. He's led for 15 years and served as the executive director of the Zizo House in Hartford, Connecticut. This is his second time on the trip. And joining him also is his wife, Pamela. Pamela is a proud mom, grandma, believe it or not, wife, entrepreneur, healer, organizer, and advocate. She's worked strongly with the Black Lives Matter movement in Hartford, Connecticut, and other places throughout. This is also her second time going on the trip. And then next to Pamela, we have Ms. Ghoufran. Ghoufran is the president of the Tree of Life Educational Fund. She is an active member of the Islamic Association of Greater Hartford and works strongly with the refugee settlement program. And then next to Ghoufran, we have Shelly. Shelly is Susan's husband, first and foremost. Shelly Altman chairs for the New Haven chapter Jewish Voices for Peace. The Tree of Life journey was actually his third time to visit Palestine and Israel in recent years, and he is a software developer by profession. Next to Shelly, we have Steve. Steve is a senior minister for the First Congregational Church of Old Lyme. He was actually one of the trip directors with us this year for the Tree of Life journey, along with John and Dr. Reza. He holds a PhD in religious studies for Yale University, and works, and most of his work is primarily done in Old Lyme, and along with being a lecturer in ethics at Harvard Divinity School. Next to Steve, we have, last but certainly not least, Dr. Reza Mansour. Dr. Reza Mansour, also third time, right? Fourth. Wow, okay, beat me on that one. Fourth time going to Palestine. Apparently he loves it that much. He is the president of the Berlin Mejid, the Islamic Association of Greater Hartford, and is a doctor in cardiology in the Greater Hartford area. So I'm very excited for you guys to hear from them today. They all have great stories. The way that the session is going to go is each of them are going to speak for 6 minutes, and then after we're going to entertain questions and hopefully give you some answers. Thank you again. Start off with Susan? Oh, sure.
Excuse me, and Joanna has the signs. 2-minute warning, 30-second warning.
We'll cut you off right then.
Okay, well, that's appropriate. I wanted to talk for a little bit about silencing of stories and voices and the opportunity that we had to hear narratives from people who experience violence and oppression that's not reported in our mainstream media. So we spent 3 days in a Bedouin community in the Negev desert. And aside from experiencing their fabulous hospitality, which I can't recommend them enough, we got to listen to them tell their own story. They're an indigenous people, but they're characterized by Israeli society and international society as backward, not modern, crime-ridden, poor, essentially a problem either that's their problem to solve, or maybe some generous outsider would solve their problem for them. The facts that we learned were very different from that. In 1948, the foundation of Israel caused the expulsion of 80 to 90% of the Bedouin to the surrounding Arab countries. And they concentrated the remaining 11,000 Bedouin into an area that's 10% of their original land. And the claim is that they're desert nomads, that they have no land rights because they never settled the land. They don't really care, or they shouldn't really care. On the contrary, the Bedouins are a semi-nomadic people. They have subsisted on farming and raising herds in the Negev area, Nakab in Arabic, for generations, for centuries. And they are very attached to their family lands and their traditional lands that they come back to. They do move, but they come back to those same places. Those family compounds, which have become villages, are unrecognized by Israel. So they don't get services, they don't get roads repaired, they don't get water, they don't get electricity, basic services, because they're unrecognized villages, because Israel controls how they live, and they don't want them to live in their traditional homes. So the other aspect of the marginalization of these people is that all in the land that they've been compressed to, the most fertile land is taken for other purposes. And the area we were in, there's a gigantic military base that takes up the whole valley, the fertile part. And so the Bedouin villages are in the hills where it's much more difficult to grow things. So that's just one example of a narrative that's been silenced, and it's characteristic of every group of Palestinians and Arab Israelis that we met with. Some other examples are the silencing of the story of 1948 and when 500 Arab villages were demolished and the trees were planted on top of them. The money for the trees, much of it is raised by the Jewish National Fund, and many Americans give money to plant a tree in Israel, make the desert bloom. These are planted on top of the Palestinian villages that have been raised, and they're not even indigenous trees. And so that's a silencing of that history. There's the criminalization of protest speech and nonviolent actions, such as some members of our group who were praying at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. When they were leaving, they took a picture of themselves with the Palestinian flag, and they were detained by the Israeli police and held for 7 hours. And what was their charge? Incitement. But it's much worse for Palestinians. The Palestinians in Nabi Saleh, where Ahed Tamimi was made famous this spring for slapping an Israeli settler, have protests every single week. There's a Palestinian citizen of Israel who's been in jail for several years she's a poet, and she's in jail for posting things on Facebook that are not appropriate to the Israeli narrative. There's the blacklisting of Jewish Voice for Peace, an organization I'm proud to be part of. So this may all sound familiar to you, because in the US we also have a long history of silencing narratives and history that's not consistent with the dominant narrative. So I felt very fortunate to be traveling with Muslims, people of color, and indigenous Americans who have long experienced the silencing acutely here and continue to do so. So listening and hearing people who've been silenced is my biggest takeaway. It's not always easy, and I returned to the US committed to honoring and listening to silenced voices and stories that are outside the narrative I'm accustomed to hearing, and to telling the story of the Palestinians that's not reported here.
Hello, I'm John Selders, and let me be quick about my comments, and then maybe we'll get into some of the discussion. Clearly, for me, as a black man in America, when I travel abroad, I see oppression differently than other people do. And so for me, in all kinds of ways, there is a reminiscent frame. There is a very familiar that is seen and viewed and experienced as I travel, in particular in this particular context of travel, in this setting. Much of how it goes down feels very much like it goes down here in the United States of America. The way that oppression is fronted with militarized police or militarized military, the way land is grabbed and snatched, the way people are controlled and corralled, the way people are walking while Palestinian and picked on and abused. I see that in everyday life here in the United States, in my own hometown, in my own community, in my own neighborhood. So I would say for me, this trip wakens all of that inside me. And it certainly is the point at which I want to have a conversation and continue to have conversation, not about necessarily what's happening over there, although there is a whole bunch we need to say about what's happening over there. But there are the connecting pieces. And of course, in the midst of connecting, let's connect that it is United States money that is driving what's happening over there. It is United States policies that's driving the oppression that continues to happen to the Palestinian people. I find it very interesting within the context of being a follower of Jesus to make that connection strong. Jesus was a Palestinian Jew. And I think that gets forgotten as a Christian. That there's a direct through line that we got to pay attention to.
And hopefully my comments will be just as short because I'm more interested in having a bigger discussion. So, I mean, I'm still reflecting on everything that I experienced and everything that I took in this trip. This was actually my third trip to Palestine, second time with the Tree of Life. And I would say it was probably the most profound to me because there was so much differences and so much the Christians and the Muslims, Jews, indigenous, young, old, women, men. And so as an African American woman, I had an even more nuanced experience of from here to there. So for me, the whole experience of the traveling, who traveled, how we traveled together, and then once we got there, what did we all witness together? What did we all experience together? And what was our reactions together? And I really do struggle with what was the most important lessons for me to learn in this experience, especially coming from a perspective of a healer. The first thing I want to say is, yes, there's many connections, many things that looks very familiar to me as an African-American woman and seeing the struggle, seeing the oppression. And I know how to work with that. I know how to act in the midst of that. And so it was very interesting because I know how to act and other people didn't know how to act and respond. And that became a point, that became many points of conflict that, you know, because I have a different, I look at the world and I walk in the world in a way that is different from other people and people that we traveled with, then to experience all of that together, I don't know what to say about it. I'm still reflecting on all of that. What I will say about the biggest picture for me with what's happening in Palestine is I like seeing the map. It's this map that shows, it's like 4 pictures. You all let me know if I'm right. And the first picture shows of how much land was occupied or lived on by Palestinians, and then it has another one and some less, and then there's another one, there's drastically less, and then the last one, there's hardly any left of Palestinians on this land. And the issue is here, we hear very little of that, and when we do, we hear the rhetoric of, oh, we're trying a 2-state solution. You know, we're trying to work this thing out. But as we work this thing out, this is what's happening. Less and less and less, more and more and more oppression. So as a healer, I'm wanting to examine why that is. You know, why, if we are, I don't know if we're getting the word out enough. Maybe that's a part of the problem. But I can say that what I would like for us to do is to examine the ways in which we, within our own selves, contribute to the kind of behavior that oppresses other people, that oppresses anybody else. That if you are oppressed because you are a woman, if you are oppressed because you're elder, if you are oppressed because of your ethnicity, whatever that is, I think that it is time for us to begin to examine individually ourselves as we go out to make systemic changes. And we've done no changes on ourselves. Out there is going to reflect that. It'll change forms, but it will not change the result. You'll still have this, while you have a rhetoric of we're trying to work together, ultimately, it's not going to end well. So that's basically it.
Hello everyone, peace be upon you all. So when I have been asked to talk about something, to cover one part of my trip to Palestine, I thought what I'm gonna cover. And then I thought about one incident. It's a big and small incident happened with us, and it's the detention. So this is my first time go to Palestine, and we always were lucky to go with Jewish friends and Christian friends, and we always go as one group. We support each other, we protect each other also. And every year, every time we go, we get held and we get honored by by the Israelis at the airport, or some other places, checkpoints, that we as a Muslim we get held on a side for 2, 3, sometimes 5 hours. This particular year, it was a little bit more higher. The honoring was a little higher and different. So, and I want to cover this point because this incident made a lot of people feel so worried about us, about our safety. And I thought if I put some light on this incident, that will make that fear goes away. So we were at the mosque. We were 9 Muslims, a group of 9 out of 29 travelers, and we were at the mosque for the last day in Jerusalem. And after that, we're supposed to leave to Bethlehem. We finished the prayer. It's a Friday prayer, which is congregational prayer, which is big amount of people. They come and pray in the same time. So we get divided. The men pray in the mosque, and we pray in Dome of the Rock. It's the same place, but a little bit different. So we decided to meet in the middle of the, big open area. After we met, we decided to leave, and we thought, okay, how about if we take a group picture? We gathered each other in the front of the Dome of the Rock, and we started taking pictures from each other, with all kind of phones, cameras. And then we saw a group on the right side, and everybody taking pictures with a small Palestinian flag. And we said, oh, we waited for our turn because everybody were taking pictures. And we took the small flag, we took a picture, and we gave it back. And then we start, moving back. And on the gate of the mosque, we realized that, oops, the Israelis authorities, they asked us to be on the side. They confiscated our passports. They started searching our backpacks. We were surprised. We were not understanding what happened. We didn't take it serious that taking a picture with a flag that gonna be making a big deal for them. So they took out of 9, which does not make sense. They took out of 9. They took 5 of us, and they buried us in the old, shopping places, into the Wheeling Wall area, where I was walking over there and I realized Israeli flag there, and I felt so sad. I felt the injustice at that moment, that how come we have been detained because of the Palestinian flag while the Israelis are, enjoying taking pictures with their Israeli flag. We had to continue to go to the police station while our phone was confiscated. We were not allowed to call anybody from our group or even calling the American embassy as an American citizens. After that, we have been held for 7 hours in the cold. They did it, I think, on purpose. They put 2 of the women, me and my friend, outside in the cold, and they put 3 brothers inside the room. They tried their best to stop us from any right to pray, to go to to the washroom. After that, Tree of Life did a great job. We got a lawyer, a human rights lawyer, and she told us that it wasn't any crime, it wasn't any felony, taking a picture with a flag, just enjoy the adventure. That was sad. That was sad. But thank God we held together, we prayed over there, we felt we have right over there, even though they tried to take all the right of us. The big part that when we went out after 7 hours out of the police station, we found our friends waiting for us. That was great feeling. That we saw Steve, we saw John, and others, Maissane. And I still remember that first word I said to Steve, I'm coming back. And then I did shopping. Then I saw a store open, and I remembered my girl, she asked me to bring picture of the Aqsa Mosque. So I went, I did shopping. I felt I have to do that. I felt I have to get that fear out, that feeling. Wasn't a good feeling. And it wasn't that great experience, but it's never gonna hold us from going back. Mm-hmm. We always wanna go back. And in the beginning I said, it's a small incident and it's a big incident for a reason. It's a small incident because it's not gonna stop us from going back, but it's a big incident. It's a big incident. We didn't expect to face that, but it's a small incident if we compare it with Ahad Tamimi's suffering or the Palestinian suffering for 70 years, and Syrian people are suffering now for 7 years. So detention for 7 hours is not a big deal. Thank you very much.
What you all don't know is Ghoufran shopped everywhere. So this was like returned back to normal. She was like off to the shop right there.
Thank you.
That's
I
right.
will support my
And I was like, oh, you got to take a picture, and I didn't get one either. So we had fun.
And that's what she kept saying while she's doing this for you.
I deserve some, like, a little bit of stuff.
That's right.
Well, hi everybody, I'm Shelly, as you heard before, and I'm really just honored and so fortunate to be getting everyone's different perspectives today, as I was on our bus and in all of our travels for almost 2 weeks. I'd like to talk about violence against children, and it's a really difficult topic, but it needs to be aired. And as we're all too familiar, we have plenty of violence against children here in the U.S., starting from 2 blocks down from this mosque where Jason Negron was murdered by Bridgeport police last May, to Sandy Hook, to Parkland, to Sanford, Florida, where Trayvon Martin was killed, to Cleveland, and to John Selders' hometown of Ferguson, where Michael Brown was murdered. I'd like to fit into my 5 minutes 4 inspiring stories So I hope I can fit it all in. The first, and this is people that we met with in Palestine and in Jerusalem who are working on the issue of violence against children and against youth. The first is Ivan Karakasian, who is a director in Jerusalem for Defense for Children Palestine, Defense for Children International Palestine. And they're specifically working on the issue of incarceration of children in the Israeli military police legal system. Since the year 2000, an estimated 10,000 children and youth have been arrested, Palestinian youth have been arrested and subject to the Israeli military system. And I'd like to tell you some really sobering statistics about what happens to those children once they're arrested. 72% of them experience physical violence. This is from a survey of 600 children that was conducted by Defense for Children International Palestine and by the American Friends Service Committee. 95% were hand-tied, 85% were blindfolded, 45% were detained from their homes in the middle of the night. 66% faced verbal abuse, humiliation, and intimidation. 96% were interrogated without the presence of a family member, and this is children and youth who are between 12 and 18 years old. 25% were subject to stress positions, and 38% signed documents in Hebrew, a language that they typically don't even understand. So part of this is really supported by us as Bishop Selders mentioned, by our vast financial aid to Israel. And one of the reactions to that is that Representative Betty McCollum from Minnesota has introduced a bill, H.R. 4391, promoting human rights for ending Israeli military detention of Palestinian children. This is a land-breaking, really a land-breaking act which has 21 sponsors in the Congress, and we don't expect it to pass, obviously, in this Congress and with this administration, but it's an important first step to giving voice to this intolerable, unacceptable, horrific thing that's happening to Palestinian children. Call your representative, tell them to support H.R. 4391. There's also a petition on the table for you to sign it. Issa Amro and in Hebron. That's our next really hero. Issa founded an organization called Youth Against Settlements, which basically is working against the attempts of the Israelis and the settlers in Hebron to displace Palestinians who have been there for many, many years. And it's a very violent situation. And what they're doing is empowering people to record what's happening, to work with families, to stay in their locations rather than move out of their land, which is basically controlled by the Israeli military occupation there. And so Issa Amro himself faces 16 charges by the Israeli military legal system for, and I think we heard this before, incitement. So that word is used over and over again. That charge is used over and over again for people who advocate for justice in Palestine. Moving on to back to Jerusalem, we met with Sahar Vardi. Sahar is a 28-year-old Israeli Jewish woman who, for half of her life, has been an activist for justice in Palestine. When she reached 18 years of age, she would have been drafted into the army and forced to perform the atrocities against Palestinian children, but she resisted, and in the subsequent years she has worked with other resistors, including her own 17-year-old sister, to work them through how you resist. And the last one I'll mention is Dean Zakharov, who is working with Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence is a bunch of is veterans of the Israeli IDF who have come to grips with the horrific stuff that they did against the Palestinians and are giving voice to that and taking testimony and publishing it. They had been delegitimatized by Israel itself. Once again, an attempt, as Susan was saying, to silence voices that need to be heard. And so let me end with one thing that Dean said, which is, and I'm sure some of you have heard this in other contexts, the hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain silent in times of moral crisis. And we have a moral crisis going on here as well as in Palestine. Thank you.
Well, my name is Steve Jungkeit. I am the senior minister of the Old Lyme Congregational Church, and this was my 5th time in Palestine. My first time was some 20 years ago, and it's been a privilege to be a part of these tours with the Tree of Life. I want to begin by sharing a story that my daughter told me several days ago. 2 years ago, I took my 9-year-old daughter Sabina with me to Palestine. And she became very, very awakened and conscious of all the injustices that were going on over there, and has continued to be active and thoughtful about these issues. So 2 days ago, she reported a conversation that she had with me with an adult family member. The subject of Palestine came up, and this adult family member said, well, you know, it's the Palestinians who keep getting all of this U.S. money, and they keep using it to build all sorts of, you know, weapons and things like that. And my now 11-year-old daughter was able to say, on the contrary, it's the other way around. It's actually the Israelis who get all this money and who build all of these weapons. And I was so, so proud of her, because being over there with a 9-year-old, now 11-year-old, given all the things that are happening, as Shelly shared with young people, is a heartbreaking sort of thing. Now, to that point of countering this wider narrative, I think it's so tempting and easy, particularly in the United States, to live in a kind of bubble and to not be able to penetrate that bubble somehow. Now, let me give you an image of what this looks like. After our friends were arrested and detained and were being held in prison, many of us stood outside the jail waiting for them to be released, doing what we could to get them released. As we were waiting there for a good 7 hours, we saw a lot of things standing outside the prison. One thing we saw was an 11-year-old, or 11, 10, I don't know how old this kid was, a young Palestinian child exiting the prison. He also had been detained. When he got out, he kind of looked around, you know, where are my parents? Where are the people who are here to receive me? A very heartbreaking moment, but the even more heartbreaking and troubling moment was this. As the hours wore on, as the day dragged on and as night came on, a tour group came by, and they came and stood right by the police center where our friends were being held, and they were a part of a religious tour group. And they must have stood by this police station for, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I'm not sure how long it was, and they were absolutely riveted by the stones of the old city of Jerusalem, by the Tower of David. They were hearing all sorts of archaeological and historical facts, presumably learning a lot about what happened 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago, or 4,000 years ago, but they were absolutely and utterly oblivious to what was going on 10 feet away from them. They had no idea of the human drama that was occurring right by that police station, and they were just oblivious to it. That, to me, is a metaphor for the ways that many of us choose to live our lives. Many of us choose to go through the world pretending that we don't see those things, using our faith to shield ourselves from these current day realities while concentrating on realities that took place 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. I wish to be a part of a faith tradition that pushes us out of that bubble and to confront the realities that are occurring now. I want to end with something that Cornel West is fond of saying. When he speaks, he begins by saying, sometimes he begins by quoting Socrates, who said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This is something that's true. I believe this. But then he follows that up right away with a quote from Malcolm X, who says, "The examined life is hard."
Yeah.
The examined life is hard. Here in the Tree of Life, we believe that the unexamined life is not worth living, that we need to get outside of that bubble. But we also believe that the examined life is hard but necessary, and we're pleased to be able to engage in that sort of work. So thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. God's peace be upon you all. In God's name, the most forgiving and compassionate, the most merciful, which is how we always begin, and sending our peace and blessings on all of the messengers of God. And we read in the Quran, God says, "La nufarriqu ahadim min rusulih." God doesn't differentiate between any of his messengers. And so it was interesting when David Good from the Old Lion Congregational Church and the Tree of Life invited me 4 years ago and said, "You know, you speak about how much you revere Jesus. Come walk in the footsteps of Jesus with us. You go to Mecca and Medina in the footsteps of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Of course, it's also Ibrahim alayhi salam. But this was it really got me thinking. And I want to reflect on the fact, from a religious perspective, what drove us to go, because it's not just the life of Jesus that obviously we witnessed, but it was going to Hebron and seeing the fact that it was Abraham, the patriarch of all three major faiths here, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and the struggles to go to Hebron. We saw the oppression there. We saw that we couldn't go down certain streets, Shuhada Street in particular, if you were Muslim. But because we were with the Jews and the Christians, they were more lenient, and they let us go. You know, but the rules aren't that the Muslims aren't allowed, it's that the Palestinians aren't allowed. So you see that not being a Muslim is one oppression, but the Palestinians have a double oppression in the land that they live in the land that they were born in. So it reflected on this messenger Abraham, who's supposed in Islamic tradition to have built Al-Aqsa, the 40 years after he built the Kaaba, with Ishmael alayhi salam, the Kaaba, and with Ishaq alayhi salam, Isaac, the Al-Aqsa, and how he must be able to see, as we know, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam can actually take salam. He can see those who come and give him the greetings of peace. How much does Ibrahim alayhi salam see of his descendants who are fighting and who have kind of almost lost it in terms of the message that Ibrahim alayhi salam is bringing? And of Moses, right? When we talk about the messengers, we talk about Moses, who spent his whole life trying to get to Jerusalem. And we went on this journey to Mount Nebo, where we saw all of the beauty of Jerusalem, from the Dead Sea to Hebron to Jerusalem, and the lights and the buildings of Jerusalem, and how the angel of death came at that time to Moses and said, by the way, this is the end. You're not going to get to Jerusalem. God has said that this is the end of the journey for you. And how Moses refused. And the angel of death goes back to God and says, Moses refuses. And so God says, tell him to put his hand on a sheep, and he will give him a year for every single fur that his hand touches. And the angel of death said that to Moses, and he said, but will I get to Jerusalem? And the angel of death said, no, this God has not allowed. And then he said, well, then take me, because I don't want to live and live and live if I can't get to Jerusalem. So the power of Jerusalem, the attraction of Jerusalem, not just from Abraham building it there, but from Moses struggling to get there, to Jesus' life in Jerusalem, in the temple, you know, doing all of the spiritual work that he did, and visiting the beautiful places that Jesus preached in, was very powerful. And lastly, of course, Prophet Muhammad and his journey in the Mi'raj, the Isra wal Mi'raj, when he was summoned to Jerusalem, right, to Al-Aqsa, the blessed land, not just of Al-Aqsa, but the land around it, where Allah has blessed, so that he could go to heaven. So there is a door, a gateway to heaven from Jerusalem, that he's able to go to have this meeting with God, as it were, to be commanded to pray. So it reflected on the fact that all of these messengers come down, but why are we struggling so hard to live amicably in Jerusalem? And perhaps God wants it so. He wants this dynamic struggle for us to reflect on life and see whether it's really about just praying as Muslims or as Jews or as Christians, or whether we all embrace this struggle to live to our highest spiritual realm, to be able to stand up against oppression, to be able, as Prophet Muhammad said of the greatest jihad, to be able to stand up and say a word of truth to an oppressor, the greatest jihad, right? And we go as Jews, as Christians, as Muslims, as all these different denominations that went to see the oppression that we saw firsthand. When we were arrested, we saw it firsthand. When we were put in, walked down the streets, the cobbled streets of Jerusalem, we saw it firsthand, and we reflected on the fact that there was a messenger who walked those streets with Roman guards dragging him along. And when we were taken to the jail, we reflected on the fact that Yusuf alayhi salam was also taken to a jail without any cause. And we reflected on all of this and said, there is a deeper meaning to us coming together on this journey. And that's what the Tree of Life represents, that we go to this holy land, that we go together as Jews and Muslims and Christians and really fight for the rights of those who are oppressed. And then bring that message back here and live that same message of fighting oppression in every form that it is, as Jews, as Muslims, as Christians, together. Because that rope that God has stretched out doesn't stretch out only to me, it stretches out to all of us to live to the highest moral and ethical values that God revealed to us through our respective messengers. Thank you.